A cold millionaire CEO saw his poor secretary humiliated on a blind date with $5. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. The restaurant sits off a quiet street, the kind of place people choose when they want to spend as little as possible and disappear as quickly as they can. And inside, the air hums with low conversations, clinking forks, and the tired glow of overhead lights that never quite feel warm enough. And at a corner table near the window sits Emily Hart, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her shoulders drawn in as if she's trying to take up less space than the chair allows, her dress modest and carefully pressed, the kind of outfit chosen not to impress but to avoid attention. And across from her is Brandon Wells, a man who talks too loudly and smiles without warmth, leaning back in his chair like he owns the room even though the cracked vinyl booth says otherwise. And Emily listens, nodding politely, because that's what she has learned to do. Because when you grow up counting every dollar, you learn early that silence is cheaper than conflict. And she tells herself this is just a blind date, just one dinner, just another attempt to step outside her routine of commuting, filing, typing, answering phones, and returning to a small apartment where the radiator rattles louder than her thoughts. But then Brandon's tone shifts, his words sharpen, and with a careless laugh he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a single wrinkled $5 bill, sliding it across the table with 2 fingers as if he's offering a tip, not to a server, but to her. And he says something about expectations and value, something meant to sting without leaving a mark. And the table goes quiet in a way that feels heavier than shouting. And Emily's cheeks burn as nearby conversations dip, curiosity flickering in the eyes of strangers who pretend not to watch while watching anyway. And she looks at the bill, then at him, and for a moment the room feels smaller, like the walls have leaned in to see what she'll do next. And Emily doesn't cry, doesn't raise her voice, doesn't reach for the money. Instead, she carefully straightens the bill, folds it once, and sets it back on the table between them, her fingers steady even though her heart is pounding, because dignity, she has learned, is sometimes the only thing no one can take unless you hand it over yourself. And across the room, unnoticed by either of them, a man sits alone with a glass of water untouched in front of him, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable, his tailored coat draped neatly over the back of his chair. And this man is Ethan Cole, a name that commands boardrooms and headlines. A cold millionaire though known for decisions measured in millions and emotions measured in silence. And tonight he is not here for business, not here to be seen, but he sees everything. The $5 bill, the pause, the choice Emily makes without knowing anyone is watching. And Ethan doesn't move, doesn't intervene, because something about this moment tells him more than any resume or interview ever could. And as Emily rises from the table, thanking Brandon quietly for his time before walking toward the door with her head held high, Ethan's gaze follows her, not with pity, but with a growing sense of recognition. Because he knows her, not from this restaurant, but from the office, from the mornings when she arrives early and leaves late, from the calm efficiency with which she runs his schedule, from the way she never complains even when the workload doubles. And as the door closes behind her and the bell above it rings softly, Ethan finally exhales, his fingers tightening briefly around the glass in front of him, because tonight, with a single folded bill and a choice made in silence, Emily Hart has unknowingly stepped into a story far bigger than a blind date. And this is only the beginning. Emily Hart walks the 3 blocks home instead of taking the bus, even though it is already past 9 and the night air carries a bite that slips through her thin coat, because walking gives her time to steady herself, to let the embarrassment settle somewhere quiet instead of spilling over. And with each step she tells herself that tonight does not get to define her, not the restaurant, not the $5, not the look in Brandon Wells's eyes when he decided she was small enough to dismiss. And by the time she reaches her building, a narrow brick walk-up squeezed between a laundromat and a closed nail salon, her breathing has slowed and her face has returned to its usual calm, the expression she wears every day at work, the one that says, Everything is under control, even when it is not. Inside her apartment, the lights flicker on with a soft hum, revealing a space barely 400 square feet, furnished with second-hand practicality, a small couch, a folding table, and a kitchenette that smells faintly of reheated soup. And Emily sets her purse down carefully, removing the folded $5 bill and placing it in the drawer where she keeps her spare change, not because she plans to use it, but because she refuses to throw it away, as if discarding it would somehow mean accepting what it was meant to say about her worth. She changes out of her dress, smooths it once before hanging it back in the closet, and sits on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall where she has taped a handwritten list of monthly expenses: rent, utilities, groceries, student loan payment, each number written in neat ink, each one a reminder that she does not have the luxury of impulsive choices, that blind dates are not about romance for her, but about hope, about the possibility of a different future, one where she is not always calculating what comes next. The alarm goes off at 5:30 the next morning, and Emily rises quietly, slipping into her routine with practiced efficiency: coffee brewed at home to save money, hair pulled back, blouse pressed, shoes polished just enough to pass. And by 6:45 she is on the train downtown, standing among commuters who scroll through their phones, unaware that the woman beside them spent the night replaying a moment she wishes she could forget. By 7:30, she is at her desk outside the corner office on the top floor, arranging files, confirming appointments, answering emails before most of the building has fully woken up, and when Ethan Cole arrives, precisely on time as always, his presence shifts the air in the hallway, quiet conversations lowering automatically, because he is a man whose reputation precedes him, whose success has been written about in business magazines and whispered about in break rooms, and Emily greets him with the same calm professionalism she always does, offering the schedule for the day, noting the morning meeting, the afternoon call, the dinner he is expected to attend, and Ethan nods, his expression cool, his voice measured, giving no indication that less than 12 hours ago he watched her walk out of a restaurant with her dignity intact and her heart bruised. As the morning unfolds, Emily moves through her tasks seamlessly, typing, organizing, coordinating, never mentioning the blind date, never hinting at what happened, because she has learned that vulnerability has a cost she cannot afford at work. And from his office, through the glass walls that separate power from precision, Ethan observes her with new awareness, noticing the steadiness in her movements, the way she does not seek sympathy, the way she carries herself exactly as she did before. And something about that quiet resilience settles in him, because he knows the world she navigates is not forgiving, and yet she meets it every day without complaint. By noon, the memory of the $5 bill has not faded, but it has changed shape, no longer a sharp wound but a marker, a line drawn between who Emily Hart is and who she refuses to become. And as she delivers a stack of documents to Ethan's desk, their eyes meet briefly, a simple exchange that lasts less than a second. But in that moment, Ethan makes a decision, not to speak, not yet, but to remember, because some truths reveal themselves not in grand gestures, but in how a person endures when no one is watching. That afternoon, the folded $5 bill sits quietly in the drawer of Emily Hart's desk at home, not because she plans to spend it, but because it has become a reminder she cannot ignore, a small square of paper that carries the weight of a moment when she chose herself over humiliation. And as she rides the elevator down from the office at the end of the day, her reflection in the mirrored walls looks the same as always, composed, neutral, professional, yet inside her thoughts circle back to the blind date, not with anger, but with a tired sense of clarity, because she understands now that what hurt most was not the money, but the assumption behind it. Across the city, Ethan Cole finishes his last meeting of the day, the boardroom emptying as executives gather their laptops and papers, leaving him alone with a skyline view that usually brings him comfort. But tonight his mind is elsewhere, replaying the image of Emily folding the bill with calm precision, an act so simple that no one else would have noticed its significance. Yet to him it felt deliberate, measured, final. And he leans back in his chair, hands clasped, considering how many people he has met who would have reacted differently, who would have laughed it off, accepted the money, or turned the moment into a performance. And the fact that Emily did none of those things stays with him. The next morning, The office hums with its usual rhythm, printers whirring, phones ringing, coffee machines hissing, and Emily resumes her place at her desk as if nothing in her world has shifted, because that is how she survives, by not letting personal disappointments bleed into professional spaces. And when Ethan steps out of his office, he pauses for a brief moment, watching her interact with a delivery courier, thanking him warmly, signing the form, making eye contact, treating him with the same respect she offers anyone else. And something about that consistency settles the question that has been forming in his mind. Later that day, Ethan calls her into his office under the pretense of clarifying a scheduling conflict, and Emily enters with her notebook in hand, posture straight, eyes attentive, unaware that this conversation has nothing to do with calendars or meetings. And as she stands across from his desk, Ethan notices how she waits, patient, unassuming, never assuming the spotlight belongs to her, and he asks casually, without looking up from the document in front of him, how her evening was, and Emily answers honestly but briefly, saying it was fine, thank you, because she has learned that details invite questions she does not wish to answer. Ethan nods, then sets the paper aside and finally meets her gaze, asking a question that seems hypothetical, almost detached. What someone should do, he says, if they find themselves judged by a number, by a single dollar amount that someone else believes defines their worth. And Emily hesitates, surprised, but she does not deflect, because something in his tone feels genuine, and she replies that money can reveal character, but only in the person who uses it to measure others, and that she believes people show who they are most clearly when they think no one important is watching. Ethan listens without interrupting, his expression unchanged, but internally he feels the answer settle like a quiet confirmation, because it is exactly what he saw the night before. And as Emily leaves his office moments later, unaware of the weight her words carry, Ethan remains seated, looking at the city beyond the glass, understanding now that the $5 were never the point, they were simply the test. And Emily Hart passed it without ever knowing she was being tested at all. The days that follow settle into a quiet pattern, and from the outside nothing appears different. Yet beneath the surface both Emily Hart and Ethan Cole are moving carefully around a truth that has not yet been spoken. And for Emily, work becomes her anchor, the one place where rules are clear and expectations are defined. And she arrives each morning a few minutes early, organizes her desk, reviews the calendar, and prepares for the day with the same discipline she has always relied on. Because structure is how she keeps uncertainty at bay. The blind date fades into the background of her thoughts, no longer a sharp memory, but a dull reminder that reinforces what she already knows, that her value cannot depend on someone else choosing to see it. And when coworkers chat about weekend plans or dating mishaps, Emily listens politely, but does not contribute, choosing instead to focus on the rhythm of her tasks, the steady click of keys, the satisfaction of completing what needs to be done. From his office, Ethan observes without drawing attention to himself, noticing the way Emily handles pressure with calm efficiency, how she diffuses tension in meetings with a well-timed clarification, how she anticipates needs before they are spoken, and he begins to understand that her professionalism is not an act, but a reflection of who she is, someone who believes that dignity should be consistent, not situational. One afternoon, a minor scheduling issue arises when a last-minute client requests a change that would disrupt half the day, and while others grow visibly frustrated, Emily steps in smoothly, reorganizing appointments, making calls, offering solutions without complaint, and the situation resolves itself quickly, leaving the office calmer than before. And Ethan watches the exchange with interest, recognizing leadership qualities that do not announce themselves. Later, as the building empties and the sun dips low enough to cast long shadows across the floor, Ethan lingers at his desk, reviewing documents he has already read, because his thoughts keep returning to the question he asked Emily days earlier, about being judged by a number, and he realizes that his curiosity is no longer passive, it is intentional, driven by a need to understand the kind of person who responds to humiliation not with bitterness, but with restraint. The next morning, Ethan asks Emily to stay for a brief conversation after the weekly briefing, his tone neutral, his request unremarkable, and Emily agrees without hesitation, assuming it relates to work, because she has no reason to think otherwise. And as the last manager leaves the room, Ethan closes the door gently, not to create tension, but to ensure privacy. He thanks her for handling the scheduling issue so efficiently and asks how she learned to stay composed under pressure. And Emily answers honestly, saying that when you do not have much room for mistakes, you learn to prepare, to adapt, and to keep going even when things feel unfair, because stopping is not an option. Ethan listens carefully, offering no commentary, and then asks whether she believes people can change how they see others once their assumptions are challenged, and Emily pauses, considering the question, before replying that some people can, but only if they are willing to look past what is convenient and face what is true. The conversation ends without resolution, without revelation, yet when Emily returns to her desk, she feels an unexpected sense of being seen, not in a personal way that makes her uncomfortable, but in a professional respect that feels earned. And as Ethan returns to his office, he understands that his decision to remain silent has given him something rare, time to witness character unfold naturally. And he knows now that when the moment comes to speak, it must be done carefully, because trust, once broken, is not restored with explanations alone. By the end of that week, a subtle shift settles into the office, one that no one names, but everyone feels. And for Emily Hart, it begins with small changes. A brief nod from a manager who usually rushes past, a colleague asking her opinion instead of assuming she will simply take notes. And while none of it is dramatic, it registers, because Emily notices details she always has. She does not mistake it for favoritism or sudden goodwill, but she senses that something in the air has adjusted, as if the weight she carries has become slightly more visible to others. And she continues her work with the same quiet consistency, determined not to let attention alter her focus. On Friday afternoon, Ethan Cole asks her to coordinate a dinner meeting with a potential partner visiting from out of state. Nothing unusual, just a routine request, and Emily handles it efficiently, selecting a modest but reputable restaurant near the office, confirming reservations, reviewing dietary notes, and sending confirmations. And as she reads back the details to Ethan, he pauses briefly, recognizing the name of the place, the same restaurant chain where he once saw her humiliated, though not the same location, and he says nothing, only nodding in approval, because this is not the moment. That evening, Emily leaves the office on time for once, her workload complete, and as she steps onto the sidewalk, she checks her phone to see a message from a friend asking how dating has been lately, and Emily hesitates before replying, choosing honesty without bitterness, saying she is taking a break to focus on herself, because she has learned that not every story needs to be shared while it is still unfolding. Meanwhile, Ethan attends the dinner as planned, listening to polite conversation, making strategic observations, but his attention drifts when the discussion turns to company culture and values, and the visiting partner speaks casually about compensation and hierarchy in a way that feels dismissive, and Ethan responds with calm firmness, emphasizing that respect is not negotiable in his organization, that numbers matter, but people matter more, and the partner nods, surprised by the conviction behind the statement, unaware that it is informed by more than policy. The following Monday, Emily arrives to find an invitation on her calendar for a company-wide charity planning session, an event typically handled by senior staff, and she assumes it is a mistake until Ethan confirms that he would like her to attend and contribute, citing her organizational skills and perspective, and Emily accepts with measured gratitude, understanding the opportunity but not yet its significance. During the meeting, ideas are exchanged quickly, some well-intentioned, others performative, and when discussion stalls around how to engage the community authentically, Emily speaks up carefully, suggesting that impact comes from consistency, not spectacle, from showing up when no one is watching. And the room quiets as people support staff being interchangeable, a necessary expense but not an investment. And the words land with a familiar weight, subtle but sharp, and Emily feels the room shift, the way it always does when hierarchy is reinforced without apology. She keeps her expression neutral, focusing on her notes, because reacting would draw attention she does not want. But from the head of the table, Ethan's posture changes slightly, his attention sharpening. And when the consultant finishes, Ethan responds calmly, stating that the strength of any organization lies in the people who ensure its daily function, that dismissing them reveals more about leadership than about worth. and the room falls silent for a beat longer than expected before the conversation moves on. After the meeting, as they walk back toward the car, Emily thanks Ethan for including her, keeping her tone professional. But he pauses, turning to face her, and asks whether comments like that happen often, and Emily hesitates, weighing honesty against self-protection, before answering that they happen enough to be unremarkable, and that she has learned not to internalize them, because doing so would only make her smaller. Ethan listens, nodding, and then asks if she remembers a restaurant a few weeks ago, a modest place with dim lighting, and Emily's steps falter almost imperceptibly, because she knows immediately what he means, though she does not yet understand why he is bringing it up, and she says yes, carefully, that she does. Ethan does not reveal everything, not yet, but he tells her that he was there that night, that he saw what happened, and that he chose not to intervene in the moment, not out of indifference, but out of respect for her agency, because he wanted to see how she would respond when the choice was entirely hers. Emily stops walking, the city noise fading into the background as the realization settles in, and for a moment she is unsure how to feel, whether to be grateful, unsettled, or exposed, and she asks quietly why he is telling her now. Ethan answers honestly, saying that watching her handle that moment, and every moment since, has changed how he thinks about leadership, about fairness, and about the responsibility that comes with power, and that he believes acknowledgement matters more than apology offered too late. Emily absorbs his words slowly, then says that being seen does not erase what happened, but it does change how it feels, and she thanks him, not because she needs validation, but because recognition carries weight. As they resume walking, the space between them feels different, not personal, but clearer, and both understand that something essential has shifted, because the test is no longer hidden, and the truth, once spoken, has begun to redraw the boundaries of what comes next. The opportunity arrives sooner than Emily Hart expects, not announced, not dramatic, but woven into the ordinary rhythm of work, when the company hosts a public forum with partners, donors, and senior leadership gathered in a large downtown venue, a polished space with rows of chairs, soft lighting, and a stage set for discussion about values, growth, and accountability, and Emily attends as part of the planning team, seated near the back with a tablet in hand, focused on logistics rather than attention. Ethan Cole takes the stage with his usual calm authority, speaking about the future of the company, about responsibility, about the kind of culture that cannot be written into policy, but must be practiced daily, and the audience listens, engaged, nodding along, because his reputation lends weight to every word. Midway through the event, a panel discussion begins, and among the invited contributors is Brandon Wells, introduced as a consultant who has worked with several mid-level firms. And when Emily hears his name, her posture stiffens almost imperceptibly, her memory pulling her back to that restaurant, to the $5 bill, to the assumption that had been offered so casually, and she considers stepping out, but instead she remains seated, reminding herself that the moment no longer holds the same power over her. Brandon speaks confidently, using familiar language about efficiency, profitability, and hierarchy, and when the topic shifts to workplace respect, he offers a comment about knowing where people fit, about not confusing roles with importance, and the words echo uncomfortably through the room, subtle enough to pass as opinion, pointed enough to reveal character. Ethan listens without interruption, his expression unchanged, and when Brandon finishes, Ethan thanks him and then addresses the audience, saying that moments like these present an opportunity to clarify what respect truly means, and he invites reflection rather than reaction. He then tells a brief story, without names, about witnessing someone being judged publicly by a small amount of money, about how that moment revealed more about the person offering the judgment than the one receiving it, and the room grows quiet, attention sharpening, because the story feels personal even without specifics. Ethan continues, explaining that leadership is not proven in comfort, but in how one responds when power could be misused, and that dignity is not something to be earned through status, but something to be honored without condition. He then looks toward Emily, not singling her out, but acknowledging her presence with a steady glance. And he says that the company chooses to invest in people who demonstrate integrity when it would be easier not to, because those are the people who shape culture in lasting ways. The audience responds with thoughtful applause, not explosive, but sincere, and Brandon's confident posture falters slightly, his smile tightening as he realizes the implication without being directly confronted. After the event, conversations ripple through the space, and several attendees approach Emily to thank her for her work, for her insight during planning sessions, for the quiet competence that made the day run smoothly. And while none of them mention the story explicitly, she understands that something has shifted, not because her past humiliation has been exposed, but because it has been reframed. Later, as the venue empties and staff begin to pack up, Ethan approaches Emily, thanking her for staying composed throughout the event, and she replies that she has learned the value of letting actions speak, because words can only do so much. Ethan nods, acknowledging that justice does not always require confrontation. Sometimes it requires clarity, and as they leave the venue together, Emily realizes that the $5 bill no longer feels heavy in her mind, because its meaning has changed, no longer a symbol of dismissal, but a quiet reminder of the moment she chose dignity, and of the moment the world finally listened. In the days following the forum, the atmosphere between Emily Hart and Ethan Cole settles into something steadier, no longer charged with unspoken tension, but grounded in mutual understanding. And Emily finds that the weight she once carried has eased, replaced by a quiet confidence that does not demand recognition, but welcomes it when it arrives. She continues her work with the same precision as always, yet now there is a subtle difference in how others engage with her, listening more closely, seeking her input, treating her presence as essential rather than incidental, and Emily accepts the shift without letting it change her sense of self, because she knows respect gained through character is fragile if not handled carefully. One evening, after most of the staff has left and the office lights have dimmed to their after-hours glow, Ethan asks Emily to join him in the conference room for a brief conversation, his tone measured, his request professional, and Emily agrees, assuming it relates to upcoming plans. The room is quiet, city lights flickering beyond the windows, and Ethan begins by acknowledging the work she has done, not only recently, but consistently, and he speaks plainly, without praise meant to impress, stating that her integrity has influenced decisions at a level she may not realize. Emily listens attentively, unsure where the conversation is leading, but she remains composed, because uncertainty no longer unsettles her the way it once did. Ethan then addresses the moment that brought them here, the night at the restaurant, the $5 bill, and he explains fully now why he chose silence then and clarity later, admitting that he wanted to ensure his response would honor her dignity rather than overshadow it, because stepping in too quickly might have turned her experience into his story instead of hers. Emily absorbs his words, considering the intention behind them, and she responds honestly, saying that while the moment was painful, it also clarified what she will and will not accept, and that knowing he respected her choice matters more than any apology offered in public. Ethan nods, acknowledging the truth in that, and then shares something he rarely does, that growing up with privilege taught him how easily power can distort perspective, and that witnessing her restraint challenged him to rethink how leadership should be exercised, not as control, but as responsibility. The conversation shifts naturally, no longer about the past, but about alignment, about values that intersect without needing to be forced, and Emily realizes that this is not a reveal meant to impress, but an offering of transparency, a deliberate step toward trust. Ethan then clarifies his intentions, not romantically, not yet, but professionally and personally, stating that he wants to ensure the path forward is one she chooses freely, without obligation or expectation, and that whatever comes next must be built on equality rather than imbalance. Emily appreciates the care in his words, the absence of pressure, and she responds that respect creates space for possibility, but only when it is paired with patience. As they conclude the conversation, there is no dramatic gesture, no declaration, only a shared understanding that something meaningful has begun to take shape, not because of wealth or position, but because two people chose to meet each other with honesty. When Emily leaves the conference room, she pauses briefly at her desk, opening the drawer at home later that night to look once more at the folded $5 bill, and for the first time, she smiles, because it no longer represents what was taken from her, but what she preserved, and what that choice made possible. Time moves forward quietly after that conversation, not marked by grand announcements or sudden changes, but by a series of deliberate choices that reshape what Emily Hart once thought was fixed. And weeks later, she finds herself standing in the company lobby after hours, waiting beside Ethan Cole as they prepare to leave for a community partnership visit that was once handled exclusively by senior leadership. And the fact that she is included now feels natural rather than symbolic, because inclusion has become practice rather than performance. The visit itself is simple, a local nonprofit supported by the company, where conversations focus on sustainability, education, and long-term impact. And Emily listens closely, asking thoughtful questions, offering practical suggestions drawn from her experience. And Ethan watches as the staff responds to her with genuine respect, not because of who she stands beside, but because of how she engages. Later, as they walk back toward the car under the soft glow of streetlights, Ethan thanks her for coming, and Emily replies that purpose feels different when it is shared, and they exchange a look that holds no hierarchy, only mutual regard. In the months that follow, Emily's role evolves steadily, responsibilities expanding in ways that align with her strengths. And while her title may not change immediately, her influence does, shaping processes, guiding decisions, and reinforcing a culture rooted in respect. And Ethan supports this growth without spotlight or spectacle, because he understands now that empowerment loses meaning when it becomes a display. One evening, as Emily prepares to leave the office, Ethan stops by her desk, handing her a small envelope without explanation, and later at home, she opens it to find a note written simply, thanking her for reminding him that leadership is not about distance, but about presence. And enclosed within the note is the same $5 bill, carefully flattened and framed by the words, not as currency, but as a marker of choice. And Emily smiles, recognizing the gesture not as a reminder of pain, but as acknowledgement of resilience. She places the bill on her shelf beside other quiet symbols of her journey, and for the first time, it feels complete, no longer unfinished or unresolved. As seasons change, Emily and Ethan continue to navigate their connection with intention, conversations deepening, trust building gradually, not defined by status or imbalance, but by shared values and mutual respect. And while the future remains open, it is no longer uncertain in the way it once was. Emily knows now that her worth was never something to be proven to strangers or negotiated through circumstance, and Ethan knows that power, when exercised with humility, can create space for others to rise rather than shrink. Together, they move forward not because a moment of humiliation demanded resolution, but because a moment of dignity revealed something enduring, and the quiet truth settles between them, steady and clear, that the smallest choices often carry the greatest weight, and when honored, they can change everything.